Supply-side structural reform is now the guiding strategy for China's economic transformation. What does it mean? What are its characteristics and key components? It's no state secret that there is massive industrial overcapacity in basic industries such as coal, iron, steel, cement, chemicals, and housing. And there is substantial debilitating enterprise debt. These are China's most serious economic problems. So how will supply-side structural reform tackle them? What are zombie companies? And what happens to employment, China's biggest social concern, if zombie companies are shut down? What interest groups oppose or resist supply-side structural reform? And what will it take to implement these reforms and make them work? We need to know, to be closer to China. For more than 3 decades, China's rapid economic growth was fueled largely by investments and exports, and to a lesser extent by consumption. In economics, these 3 factors represent the demand side. This model worked exceedingly well, boosting China to become the world's 2nd largest economy. But in recent years, as a result of industrial overcapacity and weakening world markets for exports, efforts to spur the demand side began losing their magic. Now, to reinvigorate its economy, China is turning to the supply side. What is China's version of supply-side structural reform, and how is it supposed to transform China's economy? To understand supply-side structural reform, I speak with China's thought leaders and decision makers. Hu Tzucai is Vice Director of the National Reform and Development Commission. His portfolio covers development and planning, basic industries, price supervision, and anti-monopoly. Fang Gang, a distinguished economist, is Director of the National Economic Research Institute in Beijing. Professor Fan, what's your understanding of supply-side structural reform that the Chinese government has focused on? What are some of its characteristics and components?
Today, the supply-side issue become one of the major problems which block the way of the short-term growth. For example, people say, well, investment drops so much. Private sector, corporate sector really don't invest anymore. But why is that? It's not because they don't have money. So it's not a monetary policy, it's not the demand side policy. It's because there's overcapacity there. With so huge overcapacity, who would invest?
China's overcapacity problem has given rise to a large number of zombie companies. Zombie companies, the living dead, refer to enterprises that can't make ends meet through their regular businesses and have been subsidized by government financing or bank loans for 3 years in a row. Most of these zombie companies are state-owned enterprises, SOEs. In 2015, China had the capacity to produce 1.1 billion tons of steel and 5.7 billion tons of coal. But the actual outputs were 0.8 billion and 3.6 billion tons, respectively. That means China can produce much more steel and coal than it needs. Now the Chinese government has made it a priority to cut overcapacity in these industries.
This is zombie company, mostly a state company. If it's a private company, it's already gone. You don't pay, you just collect. The collateral will be collected. And there's no market for them. They will stay there for a while without any change because nobody wanted the bankrupted. Local government, they have their taxes, and those managers are really they have their power, and the banks don't like them to close down because the debt there. So the better to be there and to repay.
We should mainly resort to market-based approaches to cut excessive capacity. First, we need to create a level playing field so that the market can effectively play its role and allow the survival of the fittest. This will enable excellent enterprises to become bigger and stronger. The less competitive or the backward capacity can leave the market as soon as possible. In this process, the main role of the government is to adopt environmental protection and technological standards, as well as legal approaches to speed up the exit of backward enterprises. Of course, under the circumstances of severe overcapacity, the government should take administrative measures to stop new programs that add capacity.
Reducing overcapacity has consequences. Some 1.8 million workers in the steel and coal mining industries may lose their jobs. How to avoid social unrest is a major concern for the government.
To restructure China's economy, we need to let some companies close down, and we can't avoid the problem of unemployment. On this issue, the central government would rather spend the finance on the laid-off workers than on the zombie companies.
At this stage, the issue is workers, is unemployment. How to keep them? How to keep them from the street, from becoming a social instability issue.
To appropriately deal with the cutting of excessive capacity, the unemployed workers should be resettled properly, which is a major issue. To that end, the central government raised hundreds of billions of yuan to establish a fund that will mainly be used to resettle and train the workers who lost their jobs.
In the iron, steel, coal industries, which are particularly hard hit, the government has said, the central government, that they would take care of 1.8 million workers in some way. I thought that was a good move, because then it allowed a formal recognition and not postpone the problem. But in order for that to happen, the central government had to make that very big decision, and a very costly one.
It's a big number, but actually in the Chinese cases, it's not really big. Last time, in the late 90s, the last downturn, the cycle, 30 million people laid off. So think about that number. But at that time, as you said, the cost. Last time, everybody got something like 20,000-30,000 renminbi compensation package. This time, 200,000-300,000. So that's a difference. Hopefully, this time more jobs, part-time jobs, some just individual employment, self-employment jobs can really play a role to finish this process.
Like many steel companies trying to cut overcapacity, Hangzhou Iron and Steel Company is cracking the tough nut, reallocating its staff to other positions. The company decided to close one steel factory in 2015, requiring about 12,000 workers to find new jobs. Many of the company's workers had worked there for over 2 decades. Moreover, other steel companies must also shrink. A sudden layoff seems not to be a proper fix. Hangzhou Iron and Steel Company is looking for a smoother transition. After careful planning, the company decided to offer a variety of options to these workers. They could choose to retire early, receiving compensation packages after terminating their contracts, join the labor service firm founded by the company, or start their own business with a company paying the basic social and medical insurance. The plan helped the company win the hearts and minds of its employees. By the end of 2015, most of its workers were settled. Workers of other zombie companies, however, are not always so fortunate.
Supply-side reform is mainly about addressing our structural imbalance via reforms. Now we face many structural distortions. The gravest distortion is the imbalance between investment rates and consumption rates. Over the past 3 decades, our investment rate has kept on rising while people's consumption rates have kept decreasing. In 2010, the investment rate rose to 49%, but the consumption rate dropped to 34%. This indicated a very distorted structure. People's consumption rate in the US is as high as 72%, almost twice that of China's figure.
On the one hand, many mid to low-end products face severe overcapacity. On the other hand, high-end products face undercapacity. Which explains the large number of quality goods brought back to China by outbound tourists.
Another benefit of supply-side structural reform is to meet the public's hunger for goods with better quality or new features. Here, the government is encouraging private companies to move up the value chain and focus more on innovation.
The core of the reforms is to promote institutional and technological innovation.
Li Pei-shui is running a company using 3D printing technology to produce artificial corneas. The company is cooperating with public hospitals and attracting private investors.
The economic growth will come from advanced technologies like robotics, big data, and biotech, etc. These are the trends of the future. We as investors are following these projects closely.
And the local government is supporting Mr. Li's company by providing subsidies in office rent, interest rates, and utility rates. Benefits that previously were only available to state-owned enterprises. By providing subsidies, the government is hoping that emerging industries will help transform the economy.
At the moment, China's service sector really growing. And some new industries, including the internet commerce, e-commerce, and the so-called sharing economy, like the Uber things. Those create a lot of the part-time jobs. That's become a buffer to the hard landing.
Meet China's decision makers and thought leaders. See them in action, hear their views, debate their policies. Meet China's leaders with me. I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn.
Capital is an important factor in supply-side economics. Often, the cost of capital is in the form of interest on bank loans. But when corporate debt becomes excessive and interest rates become high, companies are squeezed for profits. Even their going concern viability can be threatened. Thus, deleveraging, reducing debt, is essential to lower borrowing costs.
And then people talk about the interest rates is high. The cost for the financing is so high, and it's like the financing. But why? It's because of the short of money supply? No, it's because so much debt there, so much unpaid debt there. Who will lend to you further, right? And the cost is high because you are not repaying your debt, and the cost for the refinancing must be higher, because of the risk. So that means that the supply side issue of overcapacities and high leverage, the zombie corporations become a real issue.
So you've articulated the two biggest factors of supply-side structural reform, overcapacity and corporate debt. Just so I understand the total picture, what are some of the other elements?
Of course, another issue, when you have overcapacity, normally you have over stockpile. So that's a problem. So when we talk about over stockpile, it's about the housing market. It's about but on this issue, I would like to remind you, the recent development just show this is mainly the issue for the small cities in the remote area. And then the cost of the corporations. When people ask your cost, labor cost, for example, people don't refer to the wages itself. It refers to how much other, taxes, finance contributions to the social security systems. Those kind of items are now really high. And also some local fees, local taxation, and some extra payment to the local government, local programs, make the cost of company really high. The other issue is so-called the bottleneck issue. You develop a lot of things, you make a lot of investment, but it seems production are not really in the full scale of capacity. It's not because of no demand, but because of delivery of the demand have blocked somehow somewhere, and because some bottlenecks which relate to the market development.
当前和今后一个时期
To push forward supply-side structural reforms, the 5 tasks to be fulfilled for now and for quite some time in the future are addressing overcapacity, reducing inventory, deleveraging, lowering costs, and bolstering areas of weakness.
So what are the biggest obstacles to supply-side structural reform? The government wants to do it. It's the right policy. Leading economists like yourself are behind it. But there seems to be some impediments. What are the interest groups that are opposing supply-side structural, even if they don't say so, but by their actions or lack of responsiveness are inhibiting the process?
But as I said, the unemployment is really the biggest obstacle. You put out so many people there. That's a really concern. And the local government, this is a political issue because this is social instability. So all the local government officials are so careful.
No one wants instability on their resume, right?
That's right. That's so careful about that. So that's the number one issue, I would say. Secondly, there's really the problem of this debt, the debt clearing issue. So huge. I have to say, currently the bad loan, non-performing loan ratio is only officially only 1%, 2%. But
I haven't met anybody who really believes that.
Yeah, but it's not become official, but potentially there's a lot of other debt, but definitely not as serious as the 90s, as in the 90s. 90s is 50%, 60%. It's really there.
So what would be some of your recommendation to find that careful balance between all of these factors? What are some of the tools that you have to work with?
We need a restructuring of industries. It's not only the debt issue. It's not only overcapacity issue. You need the restructuring. Restructuring, of course, it's still not a restructuring of a state-owned company, that issue, but you need some kind of restructuring of the industry. For example, now, steel industry, how many companies we have? Something like 1,000, and you don't need so many, and you don't need so much capacity. But some capacity is still good, still useful in the future. You don't want to clean them up. But then there's not a even distribution of this debt problem among this 1,000 company. So there could be a chance that if we have some leading company which is still okay, So everybody suffer now because of the business cycle. But if some company is still okay, good, technologically, managerial capacity still good, so why let them to lead the role of merger and acquisition? Merger acquisition is a market solution to this. It's about negotiation.
One of the historic problems that China has had, because all of this is state-owned, that the government has put pressure, shall we say, on the good state-owned enterprises to take over the bad ones. And what happens then, instead of having one good company and one bad company, you now have a bigger bad company. And the government has forced that. This has happened in the past a lot. That was the traditional M&A solution if you go back 20 years or 15 years of the financial crisis. How is it different today?
Yeah, the problem is still there, but I would like to argue it's not as same, serious as before, because some of the state company already on the market. They already have some investors, other investors, other than the government. So they can, if government push, well, the government still want to, push them to, merge, acquire some bad company. But now they can have some excuse. Here we have other factor. We have other investors. Here the market price will plunge. So that plays some role. That's why, the listing. I mean, the state company become a listed company have some roles. Some people say it's only risk some money, but actually the structure of management changed.
And the government is happy for that, because it gives them an excuse, which they want to have anyway, to have the companies become more efficient.
Yeah, more efficient, more market-oriented. You cannot just. But problem is still, I will argue, still there. So that's why it should be. Remind the government, the merge acquisition should be the market solution, and also merge acquisition better to be happened also between the state company and the non-state company. Make this process as a process of further reforms, gradual reform of the state company, and then make the ownership structure more diversified, with some, participation of the private sector. And some private big company can play the leading role in this merger acquisition. For example, in the steel industry, we have large steel mill, but also we have now very large private steel mill. They can play the roles. They are and everybody agreed, including the state company, the managers, CEOs. They all agreed. Those private company, their financial position is much better than us. Their efficiency is much better than us. So let them play the leading role. So it's not like 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we only have a state company. And we don't have a leading company in the many industries. Leading company meaning efficient enough, technologically good enough. But now we do have. In every industries, we have some company which capable of manage bigger assets, manage bigger scale of production.